Yeah, basically what happens is when you hit dynamic subdivision, it's actually smoothing it. I think it should say right here, smooth division levels is 2. So each polygon gets divided into 4, and then each of those 4 get divided 4 more times. So every time you're basically doing smoothing, one level of smoothing, so if you have 1,000 polygons, right, you basically want to multiply that by 4, which will give you a poly count 4 times higher. If you're smoothing twice, you then have to multiply that number another 4 times. Because like I said, each polygon basically gets split, right? So the way I sort of plan my mesh, I like to be as fast as possible. And part of that is also my laziness too. I don't like to spend a lot of extra time working. So when I build a face, if let's say I know my target is around 10,000 polys, I would say, you know what, why don't I work at one level below that or 2 levels below that. So one level below that, if you divide your target poly count by 4, that gets you to 2,500 polys. If I divide that by 4, that's 625. So what that basically means is that if I create a very, very low res mesh at about 600 polys, 625, if I divide it twice, I can get to the base resolution I want, or have multiple versions that, you know, so I might even want the 625 inside of Maya later on for animation. So I'll show you guys a few different methods of retopology. I'll start with kind of maybe the first and most obvious one, which is Zremesher. So I'm also going to try to organize my scene a little bit here. I'm just going to turn off some of the other subtools that I don't want to be visible. So I'll turn off the hair, the eyeballs, everything else, except for the head. And if we take a look, right, this is a Zremesh mesh, so it's a little bit all over the place. And if I hit Shift F, which is the polyframe button, I have no polygroups. So usually what I wind up doing for Zremesh is actually putting in polygroups. I find it gives you more accurate and more effective edge loops that follow the shape a little better. You can just go right into Zremesh and hit Zremesh with no features turned on, but I find that gives you probably the least effective results. So as I said, you can make polygroups. So one way to make polygroups is to go in, and by the way, usually when I do this work, I actually duplicate my tool, so I preserve my original sculpt that might be higher resolution with paint and sculpting details. I'm going to duplicate it and remesh the duplicate, or create a new low-res mesh. Eventually what I do is I have a new low-res mesh, I divide it a few times, and then I project or copy basically the sculpting and painting detail from the old Dynamesh version to the cleaner Zremesh version. So I've got a low-res I can send to Maya, and I've got high resolutions that I can still sculpt on, still paint on, or at least copy the information from. So, a few important things I would mention. Probably the two most important areas of the face are the eyelids and the lip line, or the edge of the lips. So you do want edge loops that follow the shape of that lip, because if they don't follow that shape of the lip, they will not define that shape very well when you start to smooth it. Same thing with the edge of the eyelids. And generally speaking too, you know, I've got a few examples on my Pinterest here, but you basically want circular loops that radiate out. So from the shape of that hard edge, the eyelid kind of has a 90-degree turn on it, where it's sort of facing away from the face, and then it turns sharply to meet the eyeball. So you want to follow that eyelid line, that lip line, and then we have circular loops that sort of radiate out like a ripple out from those areas of the face. And there is some debate on that. You know, do they need to be circular, and up to a point maybe they don't. Do you want to follow anatomy more accurately? I think, you know, as long as you have something close to circular loops radiating out of the eyes and the mouth, right? At least 3 or 4 loops coming out from the mouth and the eyes, you're going to get very good animation. And the reason why we have circular loops, or for the most part, is that you have large circular muscles around the eyes, actually, that allow you to squint and blink. And you have a series of muscles that again, they fan out from the mouth, but they also encircle the mouth as well. So it actually is kind of following the natural layout of the face. So that's why we generally have these sort of circular loops, right? And I often refer to this big blue area in this example as the robin mask. A lot of people will refer to it as that. So you do have some loops that sort of fan out. Okay, so I'll start with the polygroup Zremesh addition first. So you want to basically trace this thing out or mask it out. And there's more than one way to do this, but I usually just use masking. So I'll hold Control and basically brush this in. Alright, so if you hit Shift F, now by the way, if you have painting on your model, you can also go to Poly Paint and sort of temporarily turn off the color by turning off the Colorize button. And if I hit Shift F, you'll see the wireframe again. If I hit Control W, it's going to turn that basically into a polygroup. So I sort of want to do the same thing for the interior part of this eyelid. I basically want to sort of create like a little eye cup. I can turn off the line option, by the way, as well. If that's a bit distracting, that can help sometimes. I just want to go right up to that edge. And by the way, if you want to sometimes adjust the mask, sometimes what I do is Control Tap will blur the mask, so you can blur it more and more, and Control Alt Tap will actually sharpen the mask back up. So sometimes, you know, if you have a bit of a wobbly stroke, that can help you just refine that mask a little bit better. Okay, so once I feel good about that, I'll hit Control W to mask that as well. So what you can start to do is isolate these groups. So I usually hold Control and Shift, and that'll allow you to isolate or make one group visible. If you Control Shift click on it a second time, it hides it. And right now I still have a group actually from the ears from when I inserted them using a different mesh. And there's a bottom group that's a little messy, so I'm just going to hit Control W to create a whole new group for this part of the mesh. So again, if you want to, usually I would kind of group the bottom of this mesh because I know I'm not going to need it. I'm going to delete it later on, so I'm going to create a group for that. And by the way, you see the masking sometimes can go through your mesh. You have to activate or hold Control, which will keep your brush in masking brush mode to alter its settings. So I'm going to turn that on, or hold Control. I'm going to turn this thing called backface mask. So when I hit the mask brush or mask pen, it should generally avoid painting through the backside by accident. So anytime you have a brush that maybe goes through a thin side of the mesh and it's a problem, you can turn on that backface mask option. So again, I masked it, hit Control W to polygroup it, Control Shift click on the bottom group to hide it. So again, we want circular loops around the mouth and eyes, so I usually just do a quick masking job around the mouth and eyes. Okay, so that's one group, and I'll hide that, and I'll do another one around the eyelids. Control Shift click on that, and then I'll kind of do my robin mask that I would normally do here. Getting some weird pen pressure issues with my tablet, so I think I need to update my drivers. Things are being a little goofy today. I have to resort to working with a mouse. All right, so these are the current polygroups. Now, if you are working on a slow old computer, Zbrush will still generally work okay, but sometimes doing things like a Zremesh can slow it down if the existing or the current mesh is very heavy. So sometimes on this is on a copy, remember, what I'll do is I may Dynamesh down. So I'll drop the resolution and hit Dynamesh. Now that might be a bit too low, so let me drop it a little less. So, you know, now I'm at 500,000 polys. So something like this might speed up. You know, if your mesh currently is at 1 million, 2 million, 5, 10 million polys, and you try to Zremesh, it can be very, very slow. I'll go over a few of the features, though, inside of Zremesher. So the first one is keep groups, which I want to activate. So keep groups will keep those existing polygroups and put an edge loop where they change. So everywhere there's a change in the mesh, it'll try to create some nice clean topology. If you turn on freeze groups, freeze borders, I don't recommend it in this case. It's actually going to keep the same poly count along those borders or between the two groups. I don't have any creases that I really need right now, so I'm going to leave those off. And then you basically got the target poly count. And you have something called adaptive density. So when it detects a high area of detail, it'll actually increase the target poly count to accommodate those detail areas to try to preserve that. In this case, I know it's basically going to add up to sometimes double the amount of polygons that I want. So I don't often turn this on when I'm really working towards, especially facial mesh. I usually turn this off. Yeah, adaptive size. Basically, it's going to basically try to adapt for the shape versus the amount of polygons. So I usually kind of leave these alone. Sometimes I will adjust them, but and this curve strength, we do have a brush called a Zremesher guides brush. So sometimes I will put in, especially for the lips, because right now the lips are just one group. I do want to preserve a kind of lip line where they meet. So I will use a Zremesh guide. And so that curve strength is actually looking at the Zremesh guide. This is a curve, a Zremesh curve. So it puts, it can increase or decrease the priority of those curves. By the way, there's smoothing groups as well. Smooth groups. When you turn on keep groups, this activates. So every time it remeshes, you may lose some features. So sometimes I'll turn this down to 50% or even just off. For now, I'll leave it on and see what result I get. And I mentioned I know I want to get to around 10,000 polys, so this little target polygon count is in thousands of polys. And I'll control, click, and drag. Oops, no, I'm not in Dynamesh anymore. I do not want a Dynamesh. I want a Zremesh. There we go. So it'll take a minute to process, and then we should see some result. Before, I used to do exclusively Zremesh guides instead of polygroups. So I'd kind of draw circles around the eyes, around the mouth. Right now this isn't terrible, but again, it's not quite animation ready. So we do have some loops, but the loops kind of fork off in some strange ways. So I'm going to Zremesh again. So you can see Zremeshing a few times. It doesn't always give you the best results. Right now I'm at about 12,000 polys. I'm going to undo a couple steps to go back to this version. And also at this stage too, I can Control Shift click twice on that bottom group and go to delete hidden to get rid of that. So that's going to give me a more accurate poly count or idea of poly count. So I'll try that Zremesh again and see what I get. It's better. It's not perfectly clean. So I do find this is sort of a limitation with Zremesher. It's good for a quick, let's say you've done a major design and you want to basically divide your mesh instead of dynameshing it to get more refined detail. I find just a quick Zremesh is good for that. But sometimes getting really, really low res mesh, it's not the best at this. So like I said, you will kind of start to lose some detail. Now, one other method that I've used in the past is where I basically just turn the half option on, and sometimes this works better. So what is going to happen is it takes the existing point count or poly count, and every time it remeshes, it cuts it in half. So sometimes I find this helps the algorithm or the tool work a little bit smarter. So I'll Zremesh once and then do it again and again and again. So this can sometimes be useful. Just to mention too, one other thing that can be helpful with Zremesher is to actually open up the mouth and jaw, so you kind of create a little bit of a mouth cavity. So I'll take a look at that in a second before I move on to a different remesh technique. So right now I'm at about 15,000, which isn't terrible. Again, I'll delete that bottom group because I know I don't need it, so I'll go to delete hidden. So I'm actually about 12. And I'll try to Zremesh one more time. So something like this isn't bad, but you can sort of see it doesn't quite have all the details yet, right? So what we can do, and sometimes what I will do, is actually delete the mouth poly group. Usually I'll send it to Maya for this, but I'll show you quickly. So if I wanted to add a couple more loops back into the eyes, right now I've got a pretty decent structure here. So I can go to Z Modeler. So again, that technique I just mentioned of using like remeshing in half, I find can give you better and better results as you go down. Sometimes it's better than just going like right down to 10,000 or trying to go right down to 10,000. Right now, if I in Z Modeler, I believe by default, if you hover over an edge, it's going to insert a single poly loop. So if you need those extra loops, you can drop a few of them in right away. Same thing around the mouth, or you can also go to, I guess bevel would work as well, but in this case I'm just going to put one or two more loops. You can also slide a whole edge loop as well, and so you can slide that a bit closer and space these a little bit better. Now, if the shape is changing quite a bit, right now I'm just sort of doing a little bit of quick smoothing. Remember, we have the old head sort of sitting underneath, right? So you want to make these two things visible. So right now, the profiles may not match exactly, especially if I do some smoothing and stuff, but this is the miracle of project all. So if I go to project under subtool project all, it's going to ask me if I want to transfer the paint data. So I usually say yes to that. So if I just solo this, right, it's really, really low res, so the paint data is not showing up great. It's very pixelated. But if I divide this new base mesh a couple times, again, I'll get out of solo so you can see this, and if I hit project all, it's going to really fit that shape and pull up the painting. So I probably need to divide it one more time, which is closer to the poly count of the original. Do a project all again. Right, so now I've got lip lines that follow pretty closely to the original mesh. I still, as I mentioned earlier, I still need to split the lips and open up a mouth cavity, but I do have a good loop through the lip line. And there is some additional detail I probably need in terms of the nostrils. But this could be a good base to start from to work in Maya. Sometimes with this technique, what I will do is actually go ultra low. Remember earlier I mentioned I really like to get this thing as low as I can get. So I could go in half again, right? So right now I'm at 2,800 polys. So you see I have very few loops and edges to worry about. Right now I got a really good result at around 6,000, so for me that's actually quite good. But yeah, sometimes I'll go ultra low to something like this, and then you can do simple things like use ZModeler and say, you know what, hover over a vertex and say I want to stitch this little weird diamond shape, so that's fixed. You know, so you just have less loops to work with, and you can work more quickly. You know, so I find that can be very, very helpful. Anyways, I'll go back to this edition because I think this gets me very close. And what I can do with this is go Z this. So this is one-click export to Maya. Yeah, maybe I'll open Photoshop while I wait for that to load. So the lips, I think a lot of people think of lips in a very cartoony way. The lips do not meet at the corner of the mouth in a sharp point. They don't come to a sharp point. So typically what you have, yeah, I'll just create a new image here. All right, so typically when the mouth is open, you actually have the lips move inside. So the lips, the corners of the lips actually turn inwards when your mouth is closed or more in a resting position. But once your mouth is wide open, the lips that are actually on the inside of your cheeks tend to turn outwards a bit. So when I build a mouth shape, the topology of the mouth, let's pretend this is a mouth that's open, right? So I usually have loops that come out. And for me, I usually, in a very, very low-res character, the corners of the mouth or the corners of the eye will always be a square shape, not like a point where they come out. So I usually do at least 2 lines, sometimes 3. So you have loops coming into the corner like this, right? So I might have 2 or 3 loops coming out here. And then this is the mouth opening, by the way, right? So I tend to mirror. So I have the same number of loops above and below. And that way we kind of maintain a consistent density of mesh, right? We don't have an area that looks more high poly or more detailed or more creased potentially than another. And let me just make a new layer here. Oops. Yeah, so if you look at a simple face, if you were to lay it flat, the basic mesh plan is this. It's just, you know, loops coming out from eyes. I'm going to do a very rough one here, right? They just fan out. And usually I have sort of the middle part of the eye connects down into here. Right, so we have kind of like our circular loops, and they all kind of fan out. Okay, so that's the basic idea behind this. So, like I said, that remesh I got from Maya was pretty good, but it still needs some polishing. So a lot of times what I do, this is one of my kind of cheap tricks, but I'll take the lip line like this and just delete it. Because I know I want some of those loops flowing into the corner of the mouth. I don't want them coming to a point, which they do, right? In this case here, they kind of come into this point actually, around this corner. So what I'm going to do is re-extrude them. So I'll take those lips and hold shift and extrude down. I may just extrude a little bit inwards. Shift, scale down again, and I might scale them just a bit flatter, a little more shallower, and then pull them in. Now, if I lose the shape, the lip line, I can fix this by basically reprojecting inside of Zbrush. So this is essentially the way I'd build the mouth cavity, okay? So I'm just going to scale them flat, or as close to flat as I can for now. And I'll probably just move the lower and upper lip closer together as well. Probably also a good idea to activate symmetry on my object. There we go. Okay, So for the mouth cavity, we're going to go inside the face now. I'm going to shift drag this back one more time. And here I like to just make it maybe a little more flat. Again, I'll try to take the upper loop, the upper lip loop. And I'm going to see if I can pull this thing up a bit. Yeah, I think that's actually the lower lip, so I'm going to pull that one down. And I'll sort of pull the opposite one up a bit. Okay, so we have the beginning of the mouth cavity. So if your character does any lip sync or ever opens their mouth, we need to have a mouth cavity that encloses that mesh and we don't have just a big open void, because it will not render properly, that's for sure. So I'll take this section again, shift scale it up and maybe out a bit. Now you don't want to go through the mesh. You don't want this to go through the cheeks or the upper and lower lip. One thing I will do at this phase though is I will start to simplify the mesh, because I don't need every single loop to follow inside the mouth like this. So I'm going to go to merge and collapse. So I usually take two edges that flow along this outer area and collapse them. And then what I can do is take the interior edges, that because we've got two side-by-side triangles or three-sided polys, and I can hit backspace or control backspace to remove those. So yeah, let's do this. Merge to center. And it's okay too. You can leave triangles. There's nothing wrong with leaving triangles. Let me just say, I think the mesh, it's a little, yeah, I think I've got maybe one extra loop down here that I probably don't need, so I might take one out. And then to fix this little gap, I can actually just go to merge collapse and then do a collapse edge down here. So again, get nice consistent thing. Basically what you want to see is to be able to double click around the lips and get a nice circular selection. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some auto rigging tools like Advanced Skeleton that prefer to have circular loops. And so once you select the loops around the eyelids, around the lip line, it's very easy for it to put a controller-based facial control and animation system on there. If you're doing blend shapes, you can be a little more free-form, I would say, with your topology, but I still prefer to do circular loops like this, and to keep my mesh consistent on the upper and lower lip. So once you've kind of done simplifying that, then I would say we can build the rest of the cavity. So yeah, I might even scale this a little bit higher. So if you have teeth and gums that you want to see in there, yeah, let's just extract or extrude. So I basically begin to pull that back. All right, so just have a very simple, and when you hit 3 on your keyboard, it's going to smooth out to something that's going to look a little bit nicer. And again, you might even need to make this taller. Again, I'm not going for perfect anatomical accuracy or anything here, so you start to scale it down a bit. And then you can basically bridge this stuff off where it makes sense. Or we can just do a fill hole. If I do a little extrusion too, sometimes I'll do this with offset. Looks like it has a lot of divisions in it, so I'm going to just take that down. So I'll bring it down small enough, and then I can just do merge faces to center. So now you have a decent point there. If you're getting weird ridges in the back, again, that could be from triangulation. Just take out every second edge, and then you should have much better quad-based smoothing for that cavity. So again, usually when we're rigging and stuff, we have smoothing turned off inside of Maya for animation purposes, and then when you go to render, you'll hit 3 to smooth. So this is also where I'll sort of check, you know, the lip line and make sure all that stuff kind of meets a little bit nicer, a little bit better. the corners can always get a little bit messy. So one sort of simple remedy for this is to use the sculpting tools. There's something called the relax brush. So hit B for brush and just bring that down quite a bit. So that should allow me to sort of just relax the area a bit and get a bit better distribution. And then I can probably just tweak this a bit too. You can also use soft selection. So if you hold B and drag this up or down, you can adjust that as well. I'm just trying to scale these things together as well. By the way, there's different modes in soft selection too, so you can actually turn on this thing called volume or surface. Surface won't travel across the opening, so you can actually just grab one side and kind of pull it down and adjust it that way as well. So that can be helpful. So I'd basically repeat the same process for the eyelid. So I basically want to find that kind of outer edge of that eyelid shape that I have. I believe it's this shape here. And so you can do this with face selection or edge. I can go to detach components. If I go to detach, this whole section now is free floating. So I can delete it. And then what I would do is take this edge loop selection. I would shift and drag it in a little bit because there is that kind of hard edge, as I mentioned a bit earlier, to the eyelids. And so you can do a little bit of scaling and rotating and adjusting here. So I'm going to just scale it in a bit. And then I sort of like to do something similar where I will shift drag back and maybe scale this thing up a bit. So I have something that's like a little suction cup that would hopefully fit around the eyeball. So I don't need to make a complete enclosed cavity. But I'll usually just drag something back enough that would make sure that we don't sort of see inside the head, which would be very disturbing and distracting, right, when we see our animation. So I always like to see the smoother result as well. I think, you know, sometimes there's little shape tweaks to happen, so I want to make sure the eyelid shape is nice. If you really want a crisp edge on the outer part of that eyelid, you can do one of two things. You can take the existing edge and bevel it with a very, very fine bevel, usually 0.1. So you're actually creating an extra loop there. I find that method is a little bit better result-wise, but so instead of beveling, or as an alternative, you can do what's called a crease. So you can shift right-click, go to crease, middle mouse click and drag over, and when you see the smoothing result, it's going to kind of keep the smoothing pulled in towards that edge. Yeah, one last note I guess I should make. So if you have nostrils, if your character doesn't really have nostrils, it's more cartoony, that's fine. But one thing you can do, sometimes I'll actually delete an area and sort of redefine it a bit. In this case, yeah, I think the character's nostrils are not that big, so I'm going to just, I can take this particular polygon and then just try to shift drag it up. So shift dragging, again, my mind is being a little bit goofy today as well. I'll just do a regular extrusion then. So I can try to extrude just that shape back up. I don't want that many divisions. There we go. And then I can try to reshape. Sometimes I'll just kind of hack the area around until I get the result I'm after. But I think that's probably close to what my character had. Also, if you want to redefine, let's say you want a little bit more kind of definition around the sides of the nostrils. So some characters have really, really defined nostrils. What you can do, I will take the multi-cut tool. So in this case, I don't know if I want it to stop there. So you can always change the direction of loops by just manually cutting. So I can, let's say, cut through here. Let me try that one more time. Cut. Oh, come on, Maya. Oh yeah, the cut tool I should mention, it gets very weird in symmetry along the center line, so you may have to turn off symmetry for that. So I'll put a line here. This will affect the edges underneath as well. I'll come back and clean that up. But usually what I do is you notice I delete around the lips or I delete around the eyelids. The reason I do that is that when I have extra loops that I know I need to add to the mesh, I can put them into those openings and then just extrude them back in and hide them inside or behind the eye, inside and behind the mouth, in the mouth cavity. Same thing with the nostril. So I find the shape is a little weird here. You know, I don't quite, let's say, like this area so much, so I'm going to take these 2 points and I can merge those vertices. So again, I'll kind of leave this like open cavity where I can kind of dump the mesh I don't like into there. I'm not going to worry about the right side because I can actually just take this, or I should say the left side. I'm going to take the right side and just mirror it back over. So I'll make sure to just kind of focus on the one side. So yeah, for me this was a bit strange, this little loop area, but I'm going to keep cutting it. So I want this additional loop. I'm going to cut like so. And you can kind of just hack away at things. And I'll show you how to get by with that. So here I know there's a turn. So there's a little trick to this. So usually the nostril will kind of smooth out near the tip, or sometimes there'll be more creasing. So if you want to just terminate it at a triangle there, you can. That's not a problem. If you need to turn and crease down a bit more towards the tip, then I will actually kind of cut mid-face, go to a corner, and then cut down in like so. If I can find that edge there. There we go. So you see everything's still quad-based here. It's not quad-based here, but if I simply take that edge and go merge, collapse edge, right, it becomes quad-based again. And I would do the same exact thing here. So hit G to repeat that command. And again, you know, I've got a triangle sitting here. It's a bit awkward, so I'm going to just cut it into the opening. So a lot of times I just kind of manually recut stuff and then yeah, start taking out some edges here that I don't want. Take that one out. There we go. And then this thing could just be collapse, I think. Collapse edge to center. Okay, so if I hit 3, right, we've got the beginning of some kind of edge. So you can do a couple things with that. You can take that edge you've just cut, maybe push it back, maybe push it in, right? So that works as a defined nostril edge. The other thing I will do, because I left this little triangle, right? So I'm very good at trying to find a way in which I can reuse or use that. So what I can do here is actually add a loop through connect. So, you know, yes, it looks like a triangle, but it's actually technically now 4-sided. So that additional loop can now be kind of pushed back and in, or it can be the supporting loop for the shape of the nostril. And this will be my kind of crease fold for the nostril. Now there's a little bit of reshaping that has to happen, of course, but especially I think on the sides here, it's looking very flat and square, so I'm going to just pull these out a bit as well. Again, keep in mind you're going to be projecting as well, most likely back in Zbrush. So again, everything's kind of flowing into that loop, so if I just hold shift and drag it up or do an extrusion, there we go. Usually we'll sort of scale this back and down a bit and pull it in towards the center a bit. And then I would extrude it one more time. Backing up, and then you can just probably collapse collapse to center. Should be okay. So again, the nostril can be kind of a bit of a dumping ground for, you know, edge loops that you don't know what to do with otherwise. And then I'll just use some basic vertex editing to tidy this up. And yeah, there is a bit of you know, mesh left in here, so you can always just try to collapse these down as well. Merge vertices to center. Yeah, I'll try to merge these two. Now, one last thing. So this mesh is, right now it's at 6,000 faces. So for me in this poly count, that's fine. A lot of times what I will do though is preserve a lot of density in the face, but simplify the mesh in the rest of the head. Again, I'll show you guys a couple techniques for that. So if you want to simplify the mesh, and I wouldn't go too far. I would say take out every second edge or every third edge. There's a couple ways to do this. Like I showed you earlier, and I would do this where the hair is maybe going to hide this, or so you can weld down or merge down, take out that loop, and then you can take these out. So that would be method one, where you're kind of taking two loops like this, collapsing them. We take out our little triangle edge there. So again, this would be hidden by hair, a hat, or something else, because you will get sometimes some very ugly smoothing results. If you look closely enough, you may see some very weird shading, but so that's sort of method one. The other method is similar to what I was doing around the nostril there. Basically, you find 4 loops. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You cut from the corner of one, go to about the midpoint of another, come in like so. So I'll take this edge, right? This is, and then I'll take the 2 loops out. So 4 loops get condensed down into 2. So that's another kind of convenient way to simplify your mesh. Right? A lot of this stuff, unless you're seeing a lot of detail in the back of the head, the back of the neck, this just keeps, again, you're seeing optimized light. Make sure you don't do this in an area where it's going to be visible. So I usually kind of do it at the top, near the top. If you need extra loops, by the way, for creating wrinkles in the forehead, I've got one trick for this. So I would take from here to about here. Shift right click, go to bevel. Bevel it with 2 segments. Oops, sorry, 2 segments. Okay, so again, you get original line, two extra. I'm going to control backspace out the little corner point there. So again, I want to maintain quads as much as possible. That for me is oftentimes something that's going to give me the best results when I see the smooth version of the character. So now I've got 3 loops, right? You need a minimum of 3 loops to be able to create something like, so if I'm smoothing now and I pull this in a bit, when the character needs forehead wrinkles, right, this is the way to do it. So a lot of times you'll see this in some mesh where there's going to be, multiple forehead loops. Oops, come out to here. So bevel. I usually keep them a little bit closer together than that. So I'm going to just drop the fraction or spacing distance there. So again, if you're looking at it, I take the vertex and target weld to the corner, and then I just simply take out the extra edge in the corner. And then, like I said, when you're doing your smooth version, you're trying to create a forehead wrinkle for some concern, some worry, we get those fine lines to show up.